Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rebel Ramblings. I'm Megan and this is Stardust. In today's series I'm going to be continuing my Myers-Briggs typing collection. Basically videos where I take a fictional character from a story of some sort and I analyze what I think their Myers-Briggs type is. So if this is something that's interesting to you, please do hit that subscribe button so that you can see more of these to come. If you don't really know what Myers-Briggs is, or you kind of have an idea but you want a more in-depth analysis, I do have a introduction to Myers-Briggs video that you can watch where I explain basically what the whole system is. But for a quick overview, it is a personality typing system based in psychological research, and you can have one of 16 different personality types. Each personality type is a combination of 4 letters, and each of those 4 letters has 2 options. So for today's video, I'm going to be typing a character from the manga/anime Fruits Basket. So I do eventually want to type all of the characters in this series. However, I don't want to do too much spoiling for those of you who are just watching the anime and haven't read the manga. So I will hold off on typing some of the characters whose stories haven't really fully been told. However, nobody's story has really fully been told yet. So I'm going to be typing Yuki Sohma, who is the Year of the Rat, today. I'm going to try my best to not spoil too much, but it's a little difficult when you are trying to analyze somebody's personality without being able to talk about some of the things that they haven't brought up yet. But I will do my best. However, just in case, I'm going to put a spoiler alert on this video. Also, I have read all of the manga many times, so if you want to discuss with me, leaving comments relating to stuff that hasn't happened yet in the anime but does happen in the manga, no problem, no need to not spoil it for me. However, I would ask that you put a spoiler warning on your comment so that other people who don't want those spoilers can avoid them, because there's a lot of interesting twists and turns in this story, and I think it's really fun to kind of discover them, so I'm going to try to keep spoilers to a minimum if that's possible. I might hint at some things, it might be some things that don't make sense until you've seen it, but I'm not going to outright tell you anything. And that's part of why I chose Yuki, because he's one of the characters that you've gotten to know pretty well already by this point. There's a lot more to come, but he was one of the very first characters you were introduced to, and you've started to delve into a little bit of his psychological state of being. So Yuki's an interesting character, and one of the reasons why I was really intrigued with talking about his typing is because I feel like he would type himself differently than he actually is, because he has kind of a skewed perception of who he is. So basically what I mean by this, if you notice in some of the episodes / chapters of the book, he talks about how everyone views him as this princely, generative, kind, selfless person. And he says, but that's not true because I'm actually incredibly selfish. I'm only nice because I want people to be nice to me in return. And, I treat people well because I want to be treated well, and I'm desperate for their affection, so I do whatever I have to make myself a likable person so that I will receive their affection. And this is kind of interesting because there is absolutely nothing selfish about wanting attention or wanting affection or wanting to be liked. However, Yuki has been raised in such a way where he sees himself as a burden. He believes that he has to work to earn affection, and that when people are giving him affection, it's like a toll on them. So the first letter is the I versus the E, introvert versus extrovert. I feel like this one's pretty obvious. He's definitely an introvert. He takes a long time to open up to anyone. He mostly spends his time alone. There are even scenes where you'll notice they get home and he just goes up to his room and kind of sits in his room alone. Some of that is him feeling, perhaps, again, like his presence is a burden, or feeling like he needs his space alone because he's so closed up in his own mind. But I think a large part of that is also just that he is an introvert. Even when he's hanging out in a group of friends, he's pretty quiet. Again, quiet doesn't mean introvert, but in his situation, he's quiet because he's more observing the event, and he is not getting energy from the social. He gets energy from being alone, so therefore social situations are exhausting for him. So he definitely be an introvert. Next one is the S versus the N. So for this one, S is one of the basic ways to kind of describe is that the S thinks about the world, interprets the world with their senses: touch, taste, feel, smell. Touch, taste, feel, smell, hear. I know my senses. Anyway, they use those 5 senses to interpret the world, so oftentimes it comes to a little bit more of a logical, factual-based conclusion. Yep, this is what it is. Whereas intuitive tend to think more abstractly. To tell you the truth, I can't think of a specific reason why Yuki would be an N versus an S. However, I do think, going by the types as a whole, that one kind of fills in the gaps for me a little bit. So the third one is the T versus the F, which is thinking versus feeling. So this is the one where I think there is some contradiction between Yuki, who Yuki really is, and who Yuki thinks he is. So I think that Yuki thinks of himself as a T. I think he thinks that he's very logical and that everything he does, he's doing for a purpose, and that it's all about his brain and it's all a calculation. And I think this is what comes in with his perception of himself being selfish. He assumes that he is behaving in a certain way for a calculated reason because he wants a certain result. However, I think that this is the result of psychological trauma from his past and kind of a skewed perception he has of himself. He was never really cared for in the sense that he never had a primary caregiver. Spoiler alert, I guess. I mean, obviously he doesn't have much of a relationship with his parents considering he's living in Shugori's house. Abandonment, feelings, but he also has this sense of being on a pedestal because he's the rat, and the rat is special because the rat is the first in the cycle, and they're supposed to be the clever ones. So I think that the idea that he's the rat also leads him to think that must mean that he's clever, and everything he's doing is a trick, because in the original folktale, the rat was tricksy and clever, and he got first place because he tricked the cat out of not coming, he tricked the cow into letting him ride on his back, yada yada yada. So I think that Yuki has this idea in his mind that he must be that as well, even though I don't think he actually is. And I also think that he thinks that he's selfish for wanting anything, any minor little bit of affection or attention, so therefore he assumes that his actions in order to receive that affection and attention are manipulative, even though they're not. So I actually think he's an F, even though he would probably type himself as a T. So the final letter is the J versus the P. This one was a little hard for me because Yuki has such a dichotomy when it comes to his organization, which is one of the things I think is really fascinating about his character. I think that's something that she did really, really well with her character development of Yuki. By she, I mean the mangaka, Natsuki Takaya. And also that I really like that they brought out in this anime, which I think was kind of glossed over in the original anime because they didn't put as much attention to detail in the animation. But the fact that Yuki, every time you see him, he's dressed prim and proper. You know, he wears a tie. He has all his homework done. He's following his schedule, all this stuff. And then you go to his bedroom, and his bedroom is a mess. And I just think that's really interesting. It gives you an interesting insight into Yuki, right? He's so organized in so many aspects of his life, but at the same time, he lives in an incredibly messy room. But there's a level of disorder in his mind. And I don't know how much of that is solely from his trauma and how much of that is who he really is. But I think that's, again, a level, it's kind of hard to figure it out because he presents himself one way, and yet he also sometimes is another way. However, I still would personally lean towards making him a J over a P, partially because I think he craves the organization, even though he's not always capable of actually fulfilling it. So I think that, like, my room is kind of a mess sometimes, and I don't really care. It doesn't bother me, like, when it starts to get really messy, but, like, I don't mind disorder a little bit. I think Yuki can't organize his room because his mind is a mess, but I think it bothers him. I think he craves order, which is why I think that he's a J, even if he isn't always the best at acting like one. So that would bring me to typing Yuki as an INFJ. However, I think if you were to ask Yuki, I think he would type himself as an INTJ. But I think I'm right. Sorry, Yuki. I think I know you better than you know yourself. No. So something I found interesting about this. Couple things. So first of all, INFJ is the least common Myers-Briggs type in the real world. However, it is overrepresented in stories. So pretty much every single story that you come across is going to have at least one INFJ in it, possibly many, because they're usually the mentor figure or the wise wizard or the Gandalf, the Obi-Wan Kenobi. That type of character is almost always an INFJ, but it is the least common in real life. So another thing I think is interesting about INFJs is that they are also the most likely to type themselves incorrectly, which does definitely fit in with my theory that Yuki would mistype himself. So I did think that was really interesting. So on the other hand, INTJs are, they're the logisticians. They're very, very logical. They follow a very good path, very strategic. They can oftentimes, again, disclaimer, stereotype, whatever, they're oftentimes the type that is the bad guy in a story, and they are oftentimes, well, no, let me say, sociopaths are oftentimes INTJs. Not that INTJs are often sociopaths, but sociopaths are often INTJs, or ENTJs, but side note. So I think that Yuki would think he was that, because I don't think he thinks he's a sociopath, but he does think that he's really selfish and manipulative, and that there's something wrong with him because, oh god, I want attention. I must be so selfish. But he doesn't realize that that's actually a normal way to be. So the INFJ is known as the advocate. They are often very idealistic and very moral. However, unlike other idealistic types, like the INFP, INFJs are not idle dreamers, as they call it. So they're not the kind to sit there and be like, wow, I wish the world was like this. They're more likely to be the kind of person who's like, I'm going to work to make the world like this. So they are strong-willed but soft-spoken, and they want to help people, but they mostly want to fix why people need help in the first place. So rather than just being the person, let's say, feeding the hungry, they're the person trying to figure out why there are people that are hungry in the first place. Something that is interesting about Myers-Briggs types that I think is going to be very prevalent throughout my typing of Fruits Basket, because pretty much every single character in Fruits Basket has some kind of psychological trauma or damage, is the idea of like the unhealthy type. So every personality type has like a way that they act, and they also have a general way that they act when they are unhealthy. And so you can't just necessarily look at that type when you're trying to determine them. You have to also look at like the unhealthy version of their type. And I think that's really interesting. So unhealthy can, in some ways, be used also for like the bad guys, like the twisted version of it. So like a twisted INFJ, which is really interesting, by the way. So like the twisted INFJ, right, might be somebody who uses their traits for evil. But then there's also just the unhealthy INFJ, which is just somebody who, for some reason or another, is not at their best psychologically, and therefore they can be twisted. And so sometimes this shows as an exaggeration of their traits or their personality traits, but applied in a negative way. But sometimes it actually shows as like a flip of the traits that you would expect from them. So I looked up, because I don't know the unhealthies by as well as I know the regular ones. So for the unhealthy INFJ, it says that they try to keep people happy, but they resent them as a result. This is kind of interesting to me because I do think that Yuki kind of resents people that he feels like he has to care for, but mostly he resents himself for being unhappy, which I think is kind of interesting. He resents himself for the need to stay happy. Like the fact that he has to do something to make himself happy because he's not naturally happy because he's depressed and traumatized, he resents that. They leave arguments instead of hearing other people's perspectives. Yes, Yuki. They can be oversensitive and self-absorbed, reclusive, and avoid attachments and responsibilities. I would say that Yuki's definitely reclusive, and kind of like I had said earlier, where he just kind of goes up and spends time alone in his room, or even when they're at school, you know, he's often off doing his own thing. He's not always hanging out with the friends and everything. I think he does definitely have an avoiding attachment and responsibility thing. He doesn't let anyone in, he doesn't let anyone get close because he's avoiding attachment. And I think his excuse in the beginning to not making any friends is he doesn't want people to figure out about the secret of the zodiac curse. But I think it's actually more about avoiding this attachment, avoiding this responsibility, because it would be too dangerous and painful for him to have an attachment. So they are incurably perfectionistic. I think that Yuki is definitely a perfectionist because he really holds himself to the standard of everything being immaculate and impeccable, and when it's not, he's really hard on himself about it. And then the last one, they forget that they matter, and I think that's the one that most signifies Yuki. It's ironic because on the one hand he's being told that he matters more than anyone else, but on the other hand he doesn't feel like he matters because, again, he had no primary caregiver. There was no person who was devoted to him and giving him affection as a child, and he has such this contradiction of like, you're perfect, but at the same time nobody actually really knows you and nobody's really trying to get to know you that well. And it, it plays in it too, again, with him thinking that he's selfish because he wants affection and attention and to be liked. So anyway, that's my video for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have an opinion that you want to share about this, you think that you would type Yuki some other way, or you agree with me, you want to discuss my opinions and your opinions on his Myers-Briggs typing, please comment down below. If there's another character that you would like to hear me talk about, please comment that as well, and I will try to get to that. Like I said, I do plan to get to every member of the Zodiac, plus Toru and all the important characters of Fruits Basket. However, I'm probably going to delay some of them just because of spoilers, but if you really want me to do something now, I can just do it and tag it as a spoiler alert. Anyway, if there's any characters, it doesn't have to be from Fruits Basket, doesn't have to be from anime, it can be from anything. If I haven't heard of it, I'll let you know that, but otherwise, I will definitely get to all of those. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you'd like to hear more, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Thank you.